Sarah Williams walked through the bright hallways of Atlanta Memorial Hospital, her comfortable nursing shoes making soft squeaks against the polished floor. It was just another Tuesday morning in the physical therapy department, or so she thought. The morning sun streamed through the large windows, warming the exercise equipment and treatment beds that filled the room. At 28 years old, Sarah had already made a name for herself as one of the most caring physical therapists in the hospital. Her colleagues often joked that she had magic hands. Patients who struggled with other therapists seemed to make remarkable progress under her care. But it wasn't magic at all. It was her patience, gentle spirit, and genuine desire to help others that made the difference. "Sarah, your new patient is here," called Jenny, the department receptionist. "He's a transfer from City General. Car accident victim." Sarah picked up the medical chart and quickly read through it. Marcus Thompson, 32 years old, successful tech entrepreneur, spinal cord injury from a car crash 3 months ago. As she walked toward the waiting area, she reminded herself to remain professional, just as she did with all her patients. But when she turned the corner, something felt different. Marcus sat in his wheelchair, his broad shoulders and strong jawline catching her attention first. Despite his current condition, he carried himself with quiet dignity. What struck her most, though, were his eyes, warm, intelligent, and filled with determination. "Good morning, Mr. Thompson," Sarah said, extending her hand. "I'm Sarah Williams, and I'll be your physical therapist." Marcus's handshake was firm and confident. "Please call me Marcus," he replied with a smile that made his eyes crinkle at the corners. "I've heard great things about you from my previous therapist." As Sarah began her initial assessment, she noticed how Marcus answered her questions thoughtfully, never rushing, never showing the frustration that many patients felt when discussing their limitations. He spoke about his tech company, which developed educational software, with passion and enthusiasm. "The accident happened when I was driving home from a late meeting," Marcus explained as Sarah tested his upper body strength. "A drunk driver ran a red light, but I'm not going to let this define me. I have too much left to accomplish." Something about his attitude touched Sarah deeply. She had seen many patients over the years, but Marcus's combination of realism and hope was rare. He didn't deny his challenges, but he also didn't let them crush his spirit. During that first session, they worked together seamlessly. Sarah showed Marcus new exercises, and he followed her instructions carefully, asking intelligent questions about how each movement would help his recovery. When he struggled with a particular exercise, he didn't give up but asked Sarah to explain it again. "You know," Marcus said during a rest break, wiping his forehead with a towel, "most therapists treat me like I'm made of glass. You're the first one who pushes me to do better." Sarah adjusted his wheelchair positioning slightly. "That's because I can see you're capable of more than you think. The key is finding the right balance between pushing and knowing when to rest." As she helped him with his final stretches, Sarah couldn't help but notice how their conversations flowed naturally, touching on everything from their favorite foods to their dreams for the future. It wasn't the usual therapist-patient small talk. There was a genuine connection that surprised them both. The session ended too quickly, and as Sarah scheduled their next appointment, she felt a strange flutter in her stomach when Marcus smiled and thanked her. She quickly pushed the feeling aside, reminding herself that he was her patient, nothing more. "Same time Thursday?" he asked, his eyes hopeful. "Yes, and don't forget to do those exercises we discussed," Sarah replied professionally, though she couldn't help returning his smile. As she watched Marcus wheel himself toward the elevator, Sarah tried to ignore the way her heart had raced during their session. She had a strict rule about not getting personally involved with patients. But something about Marcus Thompson made her wonder if some rules were meant to be broken. That evening, as Sarah drove home, she found herself thinking about Marcus's smile, his determination, and the way he had made her laugh during their session. "He's just another patient," she told herself firmly. But deep down, she knew this wasn't entirely true. Something had changed in her world that day, and she wasn't sure if she was ready for what it might mean. Over the next few weeks, Sarah found herself looking forward to Marcus's therapy sessions more than she wanted to admit. The small clock on the therapy room wall seemed to tick slower on days when he wasn't scheduled to come in. She tried to keep things professional, but there was something special about the way Marcus's face lit up whenever she entered the room. One rainy Thursday afternoon, Sarah's best friend Lisa stopped by the hospital during lunch break. They sat in the cafeteria, steam rising from their coffee cups as they talked. "Curl, you've been talking about this Marcus guy for 20 minutes straight," Lisa said, stirring her coffee with a plastic spoon. "Are you sure this is just about physical therapy?" Sarah felt her cheeks grow warm. "He's my patient, Lisa. You know I don't mix business with pleasure." "But you like him," Lisa pressed, leaning forward. "I can see it in your eyes when you talk about him." Before Sarah could respond, her phone buzzed. It was a message from her mother. "Baby, are you coming to Sunday dinner? Your sister says she saw you helping some disabled man into his car at the grocery store yesterday. We need to talk." Sarah's heart sank. She had run into Marcus at the local supermarket, and when she saw him struggling with his groceries, she naturally went to help. They ended up talking in the parking lot for almost an hour, laughing and sharing stories like old friends. Later that week at Sunday dinner, Sarah's family didn't hold back their concerns. "Sarah, baby," her mother said, passing the cornbread, "you have such a bright future ahead of you. Are you sure you want to tie yourself down to someone who might need care for the rest of their life?" "Mama, it's not like that," Sarah protested, even though her heart was beating faster. "Marcus is one of the strongest people I know. He runs his own company, he's smart, kind, and his disability doesn't define who he is." Her younger sister Tanya jumped in. "But what about having children? Going on vacations? Dancing at parties? Have you thought about all that?" Sarah pushed her chair back from the table, feeling anger rise in her chest. Love isn't about dancing or running marathons. It's about connection, understanding, and seeing someone's heart. Meanwhile, Marcus was facing his own battles. At his company's board meeting, his business partner James pulled him aside. "Marcus, the board members are worried," James said quietly. "They think your personal life might be distracting you from the company. Word got around that you're spending time with your therapist." Marcus gripped his wheelchair's armrests tightly. "My personal life has nothing to do with my ability to run this company. Sarah, she sees me as a man first, not just someone in a wheelchair. Do you know how rare that is?" That evening, Sarah was finishing up her paperwork when Marcus wheeled into her office. She could tell something was bothering him. "Sarah," he said softly, "can we talk? Not as therapist and patient, but just as people." She nodded, setting aside her files. Marcus took a deep breath. "I know people are talking. About us, about you helping me at the store. I don't want to cause problems in your life. Maybe it would be better if you requested another therapist for me." Sarah felt her heart skip a beat. She walked around her desk and knelt beside his wheelchair, looking directly into his eyes. "Marcus Thompson, don't you dare push me away because of what other people think. Yes, I care about you. More than I probably should as your therapist. And yes, it scares me sometimes. But not because of your wheelchair, because of how strong my feelings are growing." Marcus reached out and took her hand, his fingers warm against hers. "I care about you too, Sarah. More than I've cared about anyone in a long time. But this won't be easy. People will talk, they'll judge." "Let them talk," Sarah said firmly. "I'm not afraid of a challenge. Are you?" A slow smile spread across Marcus's face. "Not when you're by my side." That evening marked a turning point for both of them. As Sarah drove home, she realized that sometimes the biggest barriers weren't physical. They were the ones people built in their minds. And with the right person, those barriers could crumble like sand castles in the tide. After Sarah and Marcus decided to date officially, their lives changed in beautiful and unexpected ways. Sarah transferred Marcus's therapy to another therapist, Dr. Johnson, so they could pursue their relationship properly. Their first real date was at a small Italian restaurant near the hospital. "I made sure they had good wheelchair access," Marcus said as they entered the cozy restaurant. The owner, an elderly Italian man named Giuseppe, had cleared a perfect spot near the window for them. Sarah felt butterflies in her stomach as she sat across from Marcus. This was different from their therapy sessions or casual talks. Tonight, she wasn't his therapist. She was simply a woman on a date with a man who made her heart flutter. "You look beautiful," Marcus said, his eyes taking in her simple blue dress. "I'd never seen you without your therapy uniform." Sarah laughed, smoothing her dress. "And you clean up pretty nice yourself. That tie brings out your eyes." As they shared a plate of pasta and talked for hours, other diners couldn't help but notice them. Some smiled warmly, while others whispered and stared. But Sarah and Marcus were too caught up in their own world to notice. Their dating life was different from what Sarah had experienced before, but in many ways, it was better. Marcus introduced her to adaptive sports, taking her to watch wheelchair basketball games where he played with a local team. Sarah was amazed by the skill and athleticism of the players. "Want to try?" Marcus asked one day after his game, patting the seat of an extra sports wheelchair. Sarah climbed in, wobbling as she tried to maneuver around the court. Marcus laughed as she struggled to move in a straight line. "Not as easy as it looks, is it?" "How do you make it look so graceful?" Sarah asked, finally managing to wheel herself closer to him. "Years of practice," he replied with a wink, "and a very good physical therapist." They found creative ways to enjoy life together. When they couldn't go hiking, they had picnics in accessible parks. When dancing wasn't possible in the traditional sense, they would hold hands and sway to music in Marcus's specially adapted van. One evening, Marcus took Sarah to his tech company's office after hours. The modern building was quiet except for the hum of computers. "I want to show you something," he said, leading her to a testing room. Inside, he demonstrated the educational software his company was developing for children with disabilities. "This program helps kids who can't use traditional keyboards or mice," he explained, his eyes bright with passion. "We're making learning accessible for everyone." Sarah watched him talk about his work, feeling her heart swell with pride. This was the man she was falling in love with, brilliant, caring, and determined to make a difference in the world. Their relationship wasn't without challenges. Sometimes Marcus had bad days when his body wouldn't cooperate, or when the stares of strangers became too much. But Sarah learned to read his moods, knowing when to offer help and when to step back. "You know what I love about you?" Marcus said one evening as they watched the sunset from his apartment balcony. "You never make me feel less than whole. You see me, not my wheelchair." Sarah squeezed his hand. "And you know what I love about you? You've taught me that love doesn't need to follow anyone else's rules. It just needs to be real." They started creating their own traditions. Every Thursday, they would order takeout and watch old movies. Marcus would explain the technology behind special effects, while Sarah would sing along to the soundtracks, making him laugh with her off-key notes. Their favorite activity became visiting the children's ward at the hospital where Sarah worked. Marcus would demonstrate his sports wheelchair tricks, making the kids laugh, while Sarah led them in simple exercises. Together, they showed the children that different abilities didn't mean limited lives. 3 months into dating, during one of their movie nights, Marcus turned to Sarah with a serious look. "I never thought I'd find someone like you," he said softly, "someone who could look past everything and just see me." Sarah leaned over and kissed him gently. "I see you, Marcus Thompson, and I like everything I see." As they sat together, comfortable in their silence, both knew they had found something special. Their love story might not look like others, but it was perfectly their own. 6 months into their relationship, Marcus knew Sarah was the one. He spent weeks planning the perfect proposal, wanting to make it as special as she was. He chose the place where their story began, the physical therapy department at Atlanta Memorial Hospital. One sunny Saturday morning, Sarah thought she was coming to the hospital for a charity event. As she walked through the familiar hallways in her favorite yellow dress, she noticed something different. Rose petals were scattered on the floor, leading to the therapy room. "What's going on?" she whispered to herself, her heart beginning to race. When she opened the therapy room door, she gasped. The usually plain room had been transformed. Soft fairy lights twinkled everywhere, and dozens of photos hung from ceiling to floor, all pictures of their time together. There were snapshots from their first date, their picnics in the park, their volunteer work with children, and countless small moments they'd shared. In the center of the room sat Marcus in his wheelchair, wearing a crisp black suit. Behind him stood their families and friends, including Jenny from reception, Dr. Johnson, and even Giuseppe from the Italian restaurant. Sarah's mother was crying happy tears, holding onto Sarah's father's arm. "Sarah Williams," Marcus said, his voice full of emotion, "would you come here, please?" Sarah walked toward him, tears already forming in her eyes. As she got closer, she noticed that each photo on the wall had a word or phrase written beneath it. Love, trust, understanding, strength, hope. "6 months ago, in this very room, you taught me how to be strong again," Marcus began, taking her hands in his. But you did more than help me with physical therapy. You showed me that life's greatest challenges can lead to its greatest blessings. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small remote control. With the press of a button, soft music began playing. It was the song that had been playing in his van the first time they swayed together. People said our love would be too difficult, too complicated. They said we would face too many obstacles. Marcus's voice was steady now, filled with certainty. But they didn't understand that what we have isn't about what we can or cannot do. It's about who we are together. Sarah's best friend Lisa stepped forward, handing Marcus a small velvet box. Marcus took it, his hand slightly shaking with emotion. Every day with you has shown me that true love doesn't see limitations. It sees possibilities. You never saw my wheelchair as a barrier. You saw me, all of me, and you loved me anyway. Sarah was crying freely now, mascara running down her cheeks. Her mother stepped forward to hand her a tissue, squeezing her shoulder gently. I may not be able to get down on one knee, Marcus continued, opening the velvet box to reveal a beautiful diamond ring, but I can promise you my heart, my soul, and my life. I can promise to love you, support you, and cherish you for all the days we have together. He held up the ring, its diamond catching the light from above. Sarah Williams, will you marry me? Will you continue this beautiful journey with me, breaking barriers and proving that love knows no boundaries? The room fell silent, everyone holding their breath. Sarah looked around at all the faces, her family who had learned to see beyond their initial doubts, Marcus's friends who had supported them, and the hospital staff who had watched their love story unfold. Finally, she looked back at Marcus, her eyes shining with tears and joy. Yes, she whispered, then louder, yes, 1,000 times yes. As Marcus slipped the ring onto her finger, the room erupted in cheers and applause. Sarah leaned down to kiss him, not caring about the tears streaming down her face or the mascara stains on her cheeks. I love you, she whispered against his lips. I love you too, he replied, pulling her closer. As their families and friends gathered around to congratulate them, Sarah looked at the ring on her finger, then at the man who had given it to her. Their love story might not be traditional, but it was perfectly, beautifully theirs. Little did Sarah know, this was just the beginning of the surprises Marcus had in store for their future together. The months following their engagement flew by in a whirlwind of wedding preparations. Sarah and Marcus decided on a spring wedding, when the Atlanta weather would be perfect for an outdoor ceremony. They chose a beautiful garden venue that was fully wheelchair accessible, with smooth pathways and ramps thoughtfully integrated into the landscape. Have you seen this place, Mama? Sarah asked, showing her mother pictures on her phone. The garden has these beautiful cherry blossom trees that will be in full bloom during our wedding. Sarah's mother, Mrs. Williams, had completely changed her attitude since the early days of their relationship. Now, she was the one leading the charge in wedding planning, making sure everything would be perfect for her daughter's special day. Baby, it's beautiful, she said, scrolling through the photos. But what about the aisle? Is it wide enough for Marcus to wheel down comfortably? Sarah smiled at her mother's thoughtfulness. Yes, Mama, we measured everything twice. The venue is even installing temporary wooden pathways to make sure the wheels don't sink into the grass. Marcus, meanwhile, was working on his own secret project. Every Tuesday and Thursday, he would tell Sarah he had late meetings at work, but in reality, he was attending private physical therapy sessions with Dr. Johnson. He had a surprise planned for their wedding day, one that kept him motivated through the grueling therapy sessions. You're making incredible progress, Dr. Johnson told him one evening, helping him with his exercises. But remember, no promises. We take it day by day. Marcus nodded, wiping sweat from his forehead. I know, but I have to try, for Sarah. The wedding dress shopping was an emotional day. Sarah tried on several beautiful gowns before finding the perfect one, an ivory dress with delicate lace sleeves and a flowing skirt that would look elegant whether she was standing or sitting beside Marcus in photos. You look like an angel, her sister Tanya said, wiping away tears as Sarah twirled in the dress. Marcus is going to lose his mind when he sees you. The wedding invitations posed a unique challenge. Marcus's tech-savvy nature came in handy as he designed digital invitations that could be read by screen readers for their visually impaired friends. They'd also created traditional paper invitations with braille overlays for guests who needed them. One evening, As they sat at Marcus's apartment reviewing their guest list, Sarah noticed he seemed distracted. "What's on your mind?" she asked, reaching for his hand. Marcus hesitated before speaking. "I've been thinking about our first dance. I know it won't be traditional, but—" Sarah cut him off with a kiss. "Nothing about us is traditional, and that's what makes us perfect. We'll figure it out, just like we figured everything else out." The wedding registry was another opportunity for them to show their creativity. Instead of traditional gifts, they asked guests to contribute to their foundation for adaptive sports and education technology for disabled children. "This way, our wedding can help other couples like us," Marcus explained to his business partner, James, who had become one of their biggest supporters. As the wedding day approached, both families came together to help with final preparations. Marcus's mother taught Sarah how to cook his favorite dishes, while Sarah's father spent hours with Marcus, sharing stories and wisdom about marriage. "You know," Sarah's father said one evening, helping Marcus adjust his bow tie during the tuxedo fitting, "I was wrong about you, son. You're exactly what my little girl needs." The night before the wedding, Sarah and Marcus broke tradition by having dinner together at their favorite Italian restaurant. Giuseppe had reserved their special table by the window, decorating it with white roses. "Tomorrow, everything changes," Sarah said, squeezing Marcus's hand across the table. Marcus smiled, his eyes twinkling with the secret he'd been keeping. "Tomorrow, my love, you'll see just how magical changes can be." As they parted that night, both felt a mix of excitement and nervous anticipation. Their wedding wouldn't look like others, but it would be uniquely theirs, a celebration of love that knew no boundaries, of hearts that saw beyond physical limitations, and of two souls that had found their perfect match in each other. Little did Sarah know that Marcus had been practicing something special for months, a surprise that would make their wedding day even more memorable than she could imagine. The morning of the wedding dawned bright and beautiful. Cherry blossoms swayed gently in the spring breeze at the garden venue, their pink petals dancing through the air like nature's confetti. Sarah sat in the bridal suite, surrounded by her mother, sister, and bridesmaids as they helped her prepare. "Something old," her mother said, fastening her grandmother's pearl necklace around Sarah's neck. "Your grandma would be so proud of the woman you've become." Sarah's hands trembled slightly as her sister Tanya helped her into the ivory wedding dress. The dress flowed perfectly, just as it had in the shop, and her dark skin glowed against the delicate lace. "You look like a queen," Lisa, her best friend and maid of honor, whispered, adjusting Sarah's veil. Meanwhile, in the groom's suite, Marcus was getting ready with help from his father and best man. His hands shook slightly as he tried to button his shirt. "Let me help you with that, son," his father said, stepping forward to assist. "You know, when you had your accident, I worried you might never find true happiness. I've never been so glad to be wrong." Marcus smiled, thinking about the surprise he had planned. "Dad, there's something I need to tell you about today." As he explained his plan, his father's eyes widened, then filled with tears of pride. Outside, guests began arriving. The garden looked magical, with white chairs lined up along the wooden pathway that had been specially installed. Flowers in shades of blue and white decorated every surface, and soft music played in the background. Dr. Johnson arrived early, positioning himself discreetly near the front row. He gave Marcus a subtle thumbs up when their eyes met. Everything was ready. At exactly 3 o'clock, the music changed. The bridesmaids walked down the aisle in their blue dresses, followed by little flower girls tossing rose petals. Then, the music swelled, and everyone stood. Sarah appeared at the end of the aisle on her father's arm. When Marcus saw her, tears immediately filled his eyes. She was more beautiful than he had ever imagined, her smile brighter than the sun itself. As Sarah walked down the aisle, she couldn't take her eyes off Marcus. He looked handsome in his black tuxedo, sitting tall and proud in his wheelchair, which had been decorated with small white flowers to match the wedding theme. When she reached the altar, her father kissed her cheek and placed her hand in Marcus's. The pastor smiled at them both and began the ceremony. "Love knows no boundaries," the pastor began, "and these two souls before us today are living proof of that truth." Sarah and Marcus had written their own vows. Marcus went first, his voice strong and clear. "Sarah, you saw me when others looked away. You loved me when others said it would be too hard. You taught me that true love isn't about what a person can or cannot do. It's about who they are in their heart. I promise to love you, cherish you, and continue surprising you for all the days of our life." Sarah wiped away tears as she spoke her vows. "Marcus, you showed me what real strength looks like. You taught me that love doesn't need to follow anyone's rules but our own. I promise to be your partner, your best friend, and your biggest supporter, today and always." They exchanged rings, both of their hands trembling with emotion. The pastor smiled broadly. "By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride." Sarah leaned down, cupping Marcus's face in her hands as they shared their first kiss as a married couple. The garden erupted in cheers and applause. As they turned to face their guests, rose petals showered down from above, where Sarah's young cousins had been stationed in the cherry blossom trees. The photographer captured shot after shot of their radiant smiles. "Ladies and gentlemen," the pastor announced, "I present to you Mr. and Mrs. Thompson." Sarah couldn't stop smiling as she looked at her new husband. Everything was perfect: the weather, the flowers, the ceremony. But she had no idea that the biggest surprise of the day was still to come. As they prepared to leave for their carriage ride, Marcus squeezed her hand. "Ready for an adventure, Mrs. Thompson?" Sarah nodded, not knowing that in just a few minutes, her life would change in a way she never expected. After the ceremony, a beautiful white horse-drawn carriage waited for the newlyweds. The carriage had been specially modified with a small ramp for Marcus's wheelchair. Sarah thought this was just another thoughtful accommodation, but Marcus knew it was about to become the setting for the biggest moment of their lives. "My beautiful wife," Marcus said as they settled into the carriage, "I have a surprise for you." Sarah smiled, still floating on cloud nine from the ceremony. "More surprises? You've already made this day perfect." As the carriage began its journey through the park's winding paths, Marcus gave a subtle signal to Dr. Johnson, who had quietly followed them in a golf cart with Marcus's father. The carriage came to a gentle stop beside a flowering cherry blossom tree. "Sarah," Marcus said, his voice trembling slightly, "do you remember our first therapy session, when I told you I wouldn't let my condition define me?" Sarah nodded, curious about where this was going. "Of course I remember. That's the day I started falling in love with you." Marcus took a deep breath. "Well, I've been keeping a secret from you. For the past 6 months, while you thought I was working late, I was actually attending special therapy sessions with Dr. Johnson." Before Sarah could respond, Marcus reached down and unlocked his wheelchair's brakes. Dr. Johnson and Marcus's father quickly approached the carriage. "What's happening?" Sarah asked, her heart beginning to race. "I've been working with an experimental medical treatment," Marcus explained as Dr. Johnson helped position him. "It's not a cure, but with intense therapy and these new medical advances." Sarah's hands flew to her mouth as Marcus gripped the carriage's safety rails, ones she hadn't noticed before. Slowly, with tremendous effort and determination written across his face, Marcus began to push himself up. "Oh my God," Sarah whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Oh my God." With Dr. Johnson spotting him on one side and his father on the other, Marcus stood up. His legs trembled with the effort, but he was standing. Sarah couldn't believe her eyes. "I wanted to stand beside my wife, even if just for a moment," Marcus said, his voice strained but proud. "I wanted to look you in the eyes as equals on our wedding day." Sarah stood up in the carriage, careful not to disturb Marcus's balance. Their eyes met at the same level for the first time in their relationship. "You did this? For me?" Sarah asked through her tears. Marcus smiled, sweat beading on his forehead from the effort. "For us, for our first dance." Dr. Johnson pressed play on a small speaker, and their song began to play, the same one from their first dance in Marcus's van. With his supporters helping him stay steady, Marcus took one small step toward Sarah. The wedding photographer, who had been secretly positioned nearby, captured every precious moment as Marcus took 2 more steps. Sarah reached out and took his hands in hers. "May I have this dance, Mrs. Thompson?" Marcus asked. Together, they swayed gently to the music. It wasn't the kind of dance you'd see in movies. It was better. It was real, raw, and filled with more love than any choreographed routine could ever contain. Wedding guests, who had followed at a distance, watched in tearful silence. Sarah's mother clung to her husband, sobbing with joy. Even the carriage driver wiped away tears. After a few precious minutes, Marcus's strength began to waver. Dr. Johnson and his father helped him back to his wheelchair, where he sat down, exhausted but triumphant. "I know I can't do this all the time," Marcus said, taking Sarah's hand as she sat back down beside him. "The treatment is still experimental, and standing takes incredible effort. But I wanted to show you that with enough love and determination, anything is possible." Sarah leaned over and kissed him deeply, not caring that her mascara was running or that hundreds of eyes were watching. "Marcus Thompson, you never needed to stand up to be my equal. But this moment, this precious gift, I'll treasure it forever." The carriage began moving again, taking them on their planned route through the park. As they rode, Sarah rested her head on Marcus's shoulder, both of them emotionally overwhelmed by what had just happened. "I love you," she whispered. "More than ever." Marcus squeezed her hand. "This is just the beginning of our story, my love. Just the beginning." As the weeks turned into months after their magical wedding day, Sarah and Marcus Thompson's story spread throughout Atlanta and beyond. Their wedding video, showing Marcus's surprise standing dance, went viral on social media. Local news stations picked up their story, celebrating it as a testament to the power of love and determination. But fame wasn't what interested the Thompsons. Instead, they focused on building their life together and using their platform to help others. 3 months after their wedding, they founded the Stand Together Foundation, an organization dedicated to helping couples facing similar challenges. "We want people to know that love has no limitations," Sarah explained during the foundation's opening ceremony. She sat proudly beside Marcus, their hands intertwined as always. The foundation quickly grew, offering support groups, adaptive equipment grants, and counseling services. Marcus used his tech company's resources to develop new applications that helped disabled individuals communicate better with their partners. Sarah contributed her medical expertise, creating programs that helped couples navigate the challenges of relationships affected by disabilities. Their own home became a testament to their philosophy that love could overcome any obstacle. They bought a beautiful house and modified it to be both functional and romantic. The kitchen had adjustable height counters so they could cook together. Their garden featured raised flower beds where they could plant flowers side by side. One evening, as they worked in their garden, Sarah noticed Marcus looking thoughtful. "Penny for your thoughts?" she asked, wiping dirt from her hands. Marcus smiled, pulling her onto his lap in the wheelchair. "I was just thinking about how far we've come. Remember when your mother thought we couldn't make this work?" Now, Sarah's mother was their biggest supporter, regularly volunteering at foundation events and bragging about her wonderful son-in-law to anyone who would listen. The experimental treatment that had allowed Marcus to stand at their wedding continued to show promise. Though he couldn't walk independently, with therapy and determination, he could now stand for short periods during special occasions. But more importantly, they had learned that their love wasn't measured by physical abilities. "You know what the best part of our story is?" Marcus asked one evening as they hosted a foundation support group in their living room. "It's not about me standing up at our wedding. It's about how we help others stand up for their love." The group they were hosting included 5 other couples, each facing their own unique challenges. As Sarah and Marcus shared their story, they could see hope rekindling in the eyes of their guests. A year after their wedding, they received wonderful news. Sarah was pregnant. The journey through pregnancy brought new challenges, but like everything else in their lives, they faced it together. Their doctor helped them plan for every stage, making sure both parents could be fully involved in their baby's care. "We'll figure it out," became their motto, just as it had been from the beginning. When their daughter Grace was born 9 months later, she brought even more joy to their lives. Marcus proved to be an amazing father, using his technical skills to design adaptive baby care equipment that allowed him to be hands-on in raising their daughter. Sarah watched with tears of joy as Marcus would read bedtime stories to Grace, their little girl curled up safely in his lap. Their story continued to inspire others. Marcus's company expanded its focus to include adaptive technology for parents with disabilities. Sarah's hospital created a special program for physical therapy patients looking to start families. Together, they showed the world that love knows no boundaries. 5 years after their wedding, during their anniversary celebration, Sarah and Marcus sat in their garden, watching Grace play with her cousins. "Did you ever imagine our life would turn out like this?" Sarah asked, leaning against Marcus's chair. "Better than I imagined," Marcus replied, pulling her close for a kiss. "You know, People called us crazy when we first started dating. They said love wasn't enough to overcome our challenges. Sarah smiled, watching their daughter run toward them with a flower in her hand. They were wrong. Love was just the beginning. As the sun set on another beautiful day in their life together, Sarah and Marcus Thompson continued to prove that true love doesn't see limitations. It sees possibilities. Their story became a beacon of hope for others, showing that when two hearts beat as one, nothing is impossible. Ready for another adventure? Marcus asked, as Grace climbed onto his lap. With you? Sarah replied, kissing them both. Always.